Hey guys, first question before I get into my talk. Has anybody been to the Space Center before? Raise your hand high in the air like this. Awesome, that's what I'm working on. If you're interested, come talk to me afterwards. In the meantime, we're talking about assassinating GraphQL with React hooks, Apollo, and love. I promise no one's going to die. Like Tanner said, you can find me on the Twitters, ralex1993. Yes, that is the year I was born. If that makes you feel old, I'm sorry. If that makes you feel young, I'm sorry. It's the year I was born, so can't do much about that. If you want to hear about the cool games that I'm making, or my spaceship controls, or my baking, or apparently I have to tweet about rock climbing now, so you'll hear about that too. Like we heard about before in the talk just before this one, who was here for that? Give a round of applause for Kylie. That was a great talk. Learned a lot about APIs. It is a query language for your API. So instead of just sending off a request to some server somewhere and hoping that what you get back is what you expected, GraphQL lets you specify what you want, and then it returns to you what you asked for. And we'll get to that in just a bit. Eve Porcello, who is a pretty prominent GraphQL educator, she gave a talk at React Rally last year about GraphQL, which is, my talk today is the spiritual successor to that one. She says that it's an organization layer you can put in front of all of your data sources, and then you just ask for the data you want, and then you get the data back that you want. So really handy. It really helps front-end developers, and can also make things a little bit simpler for the back-end developers too. So let's data. I'm ready. Hello. Hi, everyone. Who recognizes this API? This is the Star Wars API. It's a REST API that you can use to get information about characters and planets and whatnot in the Star Wars API. In order for me to get this using a REST API, because of the way that REST works, since every resource has its own URL, I would first have to make a request for Darth Vader. He is ID number 4 in the Star Wars API. And then if I wanted to find out his planet, I would have to make a request to the planet's API and get all the information about the planet that Darth Vader is from, which is Tatooine. And then finally, if I wanted to find out about all the films that he is in, I would have to make another request with, to get all of those films. In fact, I think I'd have to make a request for each film, which is a lot of requests that you have to make. GraphQL simplifies this by letting me just tell the server, I want to get this data. So here's how that works. You take this JSON file, this JSON blob of data that we have. We remove all of the data, the values itself, so we're just left with the keys. This kind of looks a little messy, sorry. Let's clean that up a little bit and make it into an actual GraphQL API, where at the very top we specify the name of this query, which is Star Wars person, and then person is the actual bit of data that we're getting. We give it a variable for the, or an argument for the person ID that we want to get. In this case, it's 4, and then I just have all of those keys, and then I get back that exact same JSON data when I'm done. So there are a lot of really interesting benefits that GraphQL is providing to developers that are taking advantage of it. But for me, the most obvious one is this. You ask for what you want, and then you get what you get. Keeps things really simple that way. So there are 3 different operations you can do in GraphQL. The first is to query. That's where you get data. The second is mutations, which is where you change data. And then the third is subscriptions, which is where the server tells you about any changes that happen to data. That requires WebSockets. It's a really slick feature, and frankly, it's one of the things that really got me interested in GraphQL because, like I mentioned before, I like making games. Networked games require real-time communication between servers and clients, so having that subscription layer is really awesome. Who's ever used React hooks? We're going to change gears really quick. Who in here is not a React developer? Raise your hand high in the air. Oh, wow. Bless your souls for being here when you knew I was going to talk about React. And I'm sorry. All of the frameworks are really great, but I really love React. And hooks has just rekindled that fire for me. Okay? So if you are not familiar with React, in order to store state before hooks, you had to create a class component, which was a JavaScript class that inherited from the React component original thing. Then you could put your state onto that. You have lifecycle methods for when the component mounts and unmounts and updates and changes and everything. Hooks allow you to take all of the logic out of those various functions and methods of this class component, wrap them up in their own little function themselves, and then use those in function components In my opinion, it makes things a lot simpler, a lot easier to read, a lot more reusable, a lot more testable. There are a whole bunch of benefits that come with hooks, and I really like them a lot. We're going to be talking about them today and how you can use those with GraphQL. Final question, who has ever played the game Assassin? Raise your hand high in the air, just like this. Great. For the other than the 4 of you, all of you are going to learn something today. I'm really excited to teach you about this game. This is a party game that lasts for several days on end. It can last for a really long time, typically played on college campuses. Here's how it works. You've got you, the assassin. You fancy yourself a ninja, so of course you're going to wear your little ninja garb thing. But a game like this can't be played just by yourself. You have to get a bunch of buddies, and all of your buddies are also assassins. And the way that it works is typically you have a moderator, one person, who is going to assign each person a target. Today, we are going to replace that moderator with an app so that everyone can play the game and everyone gets to be an assassin. So this moderator is going to start with one person, let's say they start with me, and assign me a target. Let's say it's the person right next to me. That is the person that I have to eliminate. Now, like I said, no one's going to die. This is a game. So all I have to do to eliminate a person is like poke them with a spoon or put hot sauce on their food, like poison or something. Something to indicate that I have found them and have the upper hand, and they are now eliminated. I haven't done that yet, though, because we still need to assign all of the other targets. And so this person that I am assigned a target, they are my target. Now they need to get a target, so they get a target. And then everyone else gets a target until eventually there's someone coming after me. Oh no, I have to run away from this person and try and find out who they are before they eliminate me. It's a really dangerous game full of suspense and terror if you're being chased by someone with a spoon, I suppose. So yeah, like I said, once I find my target, once I know who my target is, I go up to them and I stab them with a spoon, and then they are eliminated, and then their target becomes my target, and the process continues until everyone is eliminated and there's only one assassin left, and that person is crowned the winner and gets glory and prizes and whatever. Any questions? Sorry, this isn't a workshop. You can't ask questions. You can ask me later. Assassin is a great game, and we're going to build it. In fact, I can show you what it looks like right now. Here it is. This is the front end. Because we want the ability to play multiple games at the same time, I have my little game list over here, and there are no games currently running. And because this is my demo, I can't show you any games yet because that GraphQL query hasn't been written, but I'll be able to click on a game, see who my target is, and then surrender to the person that is targeting me in case I get eliminated. And we'll see all of that in just a second. So, I already mentioned what GraphQL is and kind of how it works. This is kind of what a query looks like for our game. So we can see this is the games query, which is going to give us the list of games that goes in this list right here. And we can see that the data I'm requesting is a game ID, the name of the game, the description, which tells me how I eliminate my opponent, whether it's been completed or not, so I can put it into the completed games section of the list, and whether or not a game is started, so I can put it in the active section of the list. Yeah, I'm just going to keep going. So this is the data that it gives back to us. We can see that we have a game that's currently running called Utah.js Assassin, and it's a friendly game. We just gently poke each other with a spoon. And this game has started. Any of you could be eliminated at any moment. No, don't worry. You have to sign up for it, so nobody's going to be eliminated. And this game is not completed. The second thing is mutations. Remember, this is the actions that change things in the back end. So this is a surrender mutation, which I will use if I ever get stabbed with a spoon. I put in the ID of the game that I'm currently playing, that I'm surrendering in, and it returns some data about the response, what changed. In this case, I'm asking for the ID of the game, my record, my ID, and then whether or not I am dead or eliminated. And then I can use this to update the UI based on the response that I get back. Now notice the syntax is just a little bit different here. I'm putting in next to where it says surrender with the lowercase. I really should have changed the top one to be different. But the lowercase, I'm sending a game ID, and then I'm passing that in this $ game ID thing. In GraphQL, that's how I can specify a variable, which allows me to pass in whatever value that I want, well, almost whatever value I want in my client application, and it will automatically know where to insert that into this query. So that's how I can pass in the game ID. Notice up above, I have to define my game ID variable with the $ there, and then the type that it is. Since GraphQL is a typed query language, it's strongly typed, all of the things that I send to the server have to be strongly typed, but that means I can expect everything coming back from the server to also be strongly typed, which can help me eliminate bugs, because everybody loves typed systems, right? I know there's still some angst over TypeScript and whatnot. I won't get started on Reason or something like that. Finally, we have subscriptions. This is a subscription which gives me information whenever something in the game list changes. So this is going to look very similar to our query here. I'm asking for the same data, but the difference is instead of me getting this data when I ask for it, all I do is tell the server, hey, give me this data when you have changes to it. And then if somebody creates a game or a game completes or something, the server sends that information back to me, and I'm able to update my list even though I didn't do anything to do that. It was some other player that did it. So that's how I can have this real-time application between multiple clients at the same time. OK, let's do a quick little demo. I have here GraphQL Playground, which is it's a little playground, a little IDE that I can type GraphQL queries in here, and it will give me responses. So I'm just going to type in that game list query really quick. I have to start with the query signifier to say this is a query, and I give it the name of the query, which you can make this whatever you want. And then I type in the actual query itself that I want to know. Now here's the nice thing about GraphQL. Since it has a schema that you write on the server side that specifies all the queries and types that you can request, that means it's auto-documenting. So I can come over here to docs, and I can see, sorry if that was really bright for you guys on this side, I can see all of the different things I can request. And if I want to get games, I can see all of the different values that I can get off of games. So all that I want is just games, and then the game ID, the name of the game, description, whoops, and whether it's completed, and whether it's started. And I just click this button, and it gives me a list of games. Pretty simple. Back to the demo. So that's how you can use GraphQL Playground to just write out GraphQL queries, get the response right there in this fancy IDE. GraphQL Playground comes with a lot of the GraphQL server implementations out there, such as Apollo Server, which is what I'm using. If anybody uses Gatsby, it also has something similar to GraphQL Playground, which lets you see your entire GraphQL schema and mess around with it and make queries and stuff. So if you want to consume a GraphQL API, we're not going to be talking about how to create a GraphQL API today, but to consume it, you can use curl or fetch, since it's just HTTP calls that you're making back and forth. Or you can use any of these great client-side libraries. If you are using Angular or Vue or Svelte or any other kinds of things, there are libraries that exist for your particular platform. Or if you're an iOS or Android developer, I don't know why you would be here at Utah.js, but welcome if you are here. Today we're going to be using React Apollo, which I really like. It has a lot of great features. Some people say it's bloated, but I personally like all of the extra stuff that it comes with. So that's what we're using today. I'm not going to talk about setting up Apollo because the Apollo docs are really awesome. So these two links, which you can take a picture, or I'll post the slides in the Utah.js channel later. But these will tell you everything you need to know to set up GraphQL in your React application and how to set up subscriptions as well. It's a little extra stuff you have to do to set up subscriptions. But once you have that set up, then you have access to the entire GraphQL API, and you can mess around with it in your application using either a higher order component or render prop components or hooks, which is what we're going to be using today. So React Apollo provides you with 3 hooks out of the box that you can use to access your API. The first is use query. It lets you do a query. Use mutation lets you do a mutation, and use subscription lets you do a subscription. It's self-explanatory, I hope. So let's get started. I'm going to write a query using useQuery and get the list of all of the games that are currently in progress so that we can actually populate this section right here. So live coding, here we go. I didn't open up my code editor. This is getting close, guys, I promise. Okay. here I have this game list component, and you can see that I'm stubbing out all of the data that's necessary to render the component. It just has an empty list of games, and the loading state is false and stuff. All of that is going to be provided to us by useQuery. So let's first write the GraphQL query itself. Well, surprise, I already did that right here as part of my earlier demo. So I can just copy this. And with Apollo and a lot of other GraphQL library implementations, you can use a Webpack loader, which lets you write your GraphQL files or queries in separate files and then import them in, and then Webpack knows how to convert that into something that Apollo can consume. You don't have to do that. You can do your GraphQL queries inline, but I'm going to do it with the files today because I feel like it. So I'm just going to paste that into this file that I've already created to get this games query, and that's being imported right here. And then down here, I can use query. So just so that we can see what useQuery provides us, I'm going to console log useQuery. It's a function, like all hooks are. The first parameter that it takes is the query itself, which is games. The second is configuration options, but this query is simple enough that I don't need any configuration options. We'll get to that a little bit later. And I'm just going to console log this, and we will see what it gives us. So if I pull up my DevTools and crank up the size a little bit, you'll see it gives me two objects. The first object has a whole bunch of stuff here, whether or not the query has been called, the GraphQL client, if I want to perform raw queries, the data is empty, the error is empty, the loading state is true. So I know that we're loading, I need to show a loading state to the user. And then the second object is where the loading state is false, and I actually have data, and it's the games that I can then render to my app. So now that we know what it looks like, all I have to do is just do a little bit of ES6 destructuring. Does anybody here not know what ES6 destructuring is? Raise your hand high in the air. Don't worry. It's a great thing to learn. It really makes things nice. I like it. I mean, you don't have to, whatever you want. But I'll explain what as I'm going for all of you that don't know. Destructuring basically allows me to take an object and put its properties into variables that have the same name as those properties. So there was a data property on there was a loading property on there, and there was an error property on there. And now all of the values of those properties are in these variables that I just created. I can delete all of this stuff. And now, if I come back to our game, we'll see that it has all of these lovely games here. Yay! And if I click on the game, I'll see that it hasn't started yet. It gives me a join code. So if anybody wants to join this game really quickly, make a user account, I'm going to start the game. And it shows me that this is the person that I'm trying to eliminate. Old Iron Eyes there. Unfortunately for me, whoever my target is, who I don't know who it is, but they caught up with me and I need to surrender because they poked me with a spoon, and so I'm eliminated. So I click the surrender button, and then I really want to surrender, so I click yes, surrender, and nothing happens. That's because we still need to implement the mutation. So here, in my target component, I currently have the surrender function as a no-op function. It's not going to do anything. And we need to change that. We need to use mutation to allow this operation of my app to happen, to send the request, to tell them that I surrender, and then the server can respond with whatever it wants to respond with. So, like before, I'm going to console.log, and hang on a second. I've got this surrender query here, which hasn't been written out, so let's write that surrender query really quick. It's a little bit different from before, because remember, it's a mutation, so I have to say that it's a mutation. We'll call this the surrender mutation. And it has to take a variable because I need to tell it the game ID that I'm surrendering in. So I'll say game ID, and that's an ID. The bang at the end of the ID indicates that this can't be null. I have to send a game ID, otherwise this won't work at all. And so I specify that in my schema, and I have to follow those rules. Then I use the surrender mutation. I pass it that game ID variable that I created before, and then it's going to return to me a game object. I can see that if I come to the docs, sorry for the really brightness, we'll see that if I surrender, it returns a game object, and I can get any of the values off of that. So I want the game ID, excuse me. I don't have to get everything, though. Before I was getting the name and the description and all that stuff. I don't need that. All that I need to know is my player object, the ID of my player object, and whether I'm eliminated or not. I'm not going to test this yet, because I want to actually run it in the code. So let's come back to our code. We'll plop our mutation in there. And now, this surrender mutation that I'm importing up here can be used by my useMutation hook. So I will put useMutation in there, and then it requires the first argument to be the query itself again, and then I need to pass it the game ID as a variable. Thanks VS Code for giving me that autocompletion. And I need to make sure that my game ID variable here is the same as the variable that I pass in here without the $sign, which it is. It uses the same casing and everything. So I'm going to save that. We'll go back to our game. That's the wrong one. Back to our game. And now we can see the useMutation is being logged here. Instead of giving me just an object, it gives me an array with 2 items. The first is a function. This is how I trigger my mutation. I don't trigger it on render like the query was doing. It was making that request as soon as it rendered. That's not what I want to do. What I want to do is have a function that I can call when I want this mutation to be triggered. And then it also gives me an object as the second item of the array with whether the mutation has been called and a loading state. And I'll use the loading state in my code. So let's go back to the code. We'll do array destructuring this time. It's the same as object destructuring, except with an array instead. So the first item is my surrender function, and the second item is an object, which I can also destructure to get the loading state. And then I'll just delete the loading state there, delete this function. Everything else in my component should be working just fine. I don't know why this is red. Oh, it's not in camel case. Go home, ESLint. Okay, so now I can surrender to my opponent. Let's hope that this works. Yes, surrender. Oh no, I'm eliminated. Pardon my theatrics. So that's how you do a mutation with GraphQL hooks. Let's see, how much time do I have?
7 more minutes.
7 more minutes? That's enough time to do subscriptions. I'm so excited. There are 2 ways you can do subscriptions with Apollo. The first is where you can use a subscribe to more function that the useQuery hook provides to you, and it lets you update the query with more information. That's really handy, and I use it a lot. That's not what I'm going to use today. I'm going to use the use subscription hook, because this is all about hooks today, in order to create a little toast notification whenever something happens in one of these games. So let's go to the game list here. Nope, just the game. And I'm going to add use subscription. Since I don't have quite as much time, I'm just going to do it really quick. But you understand the basic principle. Whenever something happens on the server, it will send me data, and then this hook will respond to it. Here's the data that it's going to send me. I'm destructuring that. And I'm going to use subscription. And I'm going to pass it this notification subscription. It's really simple, actually. Oops. All that it is just a single field notification, which is a string which tells me what the notification is. And it's able to figure out what notifications to send me with the authorization header that I'm sending with my GraphQL and WebSocket requests. So whenever this data changes, I need to trigger a toast notification. To do that, I'm going to use an effect. This use effect currently is just using a title that says I'm a toast. So instead, I'm going to have it send the data that we received, actually the data dot, what was that again? Data dot notification, that value that is being sent from GraphQL. And I'll put it in the top right. I'm going to do a little conditional checking to make sure that data dot notification is actually a thing, because we want to make sure that we don't totally crash and burn. Or show a toast that has nothing in it. That would be weird. And then finally, since this is an effect, I want to make sure that I follow the rules of effects, or rules of hooks, by adding the proper things to this dependency array that includes data that I'm getting from the subscription up here. And then I have this use toast hook, which just has this toast function that I can call to pop up that hook. Finally, down here, I need to turn on my use notification hook so that it actually triggers this properly. Okay, hopefully hopefully people aren't totally confused by all of this. Basically what this is going to do is ask the server for notifications. Whenever a notification happens, the server will send that to me over WebSockets. That will change data, which will trigger this effect to happen. The effect will check and make sure that there actually is a notification, and then it will call a toast that should pop up in my top right corner whenever something interesting happens. My game is now refreshed, and if I start this game, it shows that notification. That's really exciting. I'm glad that that happened. And then if I surrender, it should show, oh no, I got eliminated. That's really sad. It's even sadder if you get the reference. Anybody get the references to these characters? Bless your souls. Okay, I have like 3 more slides. We already did those, so. What about testing? I love testing with GraphQL. It is so awesome because the schema provides me with a contract, kind of like what Kylie was talking about before, something that I have to follow, but I know that the server will follow as well. So I'm able to use what's called a mock provider, which is provided to me. It's part of the Apollo testing utilities. I can give it requests, GraphQL queries that I'm going to be making in my components. I'm just exporting those directly from the components. And then I provide it with the data that I'm expected to get back from the server. And I can use that in my jest tests with React Testing Library or in Storybook. So here's a quick demo, Storybook, that shows me that same component, but not with the data that's coming from the server. This is just data that I created myself. And if we wanted to look at, well, we've got 3 minutes, right? Let's look at it. So here's what my mock looks like. I take that games request that I'm just pulling from that GraphQL file, the same thing that my application is using. I put it into this request. If there are any variables, I can also put that in there. And then I provide it with the data that I expect to get back. And I can look at my games GraphQL thing to say, oh, this is all of the data that should be coming back, so I know exactly what shape it should be in. I also provide it with a type name. That's something that Apollo provides me, which helps with the caching layer and stuff. It's just the name of the type that it comes from on the GraphQL server. And if my data isn't correct, if the data doesn't match my GraphQL query, then I'm going to get an error. It's going to say, hey, here are the problems with this mock data that you provided. You should fix that. Or if I didn't properly mock it, then it'll give me the same warning. It's very clear, very helpful so that I know what I need to do in order to properly test this. And then down here, I just wrap it in this mock provider. I provide with those mocks that I created up above. And then I render my component. And it should work exactly the same way as in reality, which is exactly how you want to be testing your components in the first place. So thank you all for coming to my talk. In conclusion, GraphQL is great. Hooks are awesome. If you aren't using either of those, come talk to me afterwards so that I can try and convince you more. And thanks. If you want to follow me on Twitter to learn about how I make bread, there you go.